G'day, you're listening to the Virtual Staff Room, and this is episode 23, Cos I'm free. Well, hello, and thank you for joining us here on the Virtual Staff Room. In this episode, I get to speak to a delightful young lady by the name of Pia Waugh. And Pia is, Pia's into everything. Pia is president of Linux Australia. Her and her husband own Waugh Partners, a Linux and open source consulting firm. They do a lot of work in the education sector in terms of making education work for schools and in the education area. She's also involved in the Australian arm of the One Laptop Per Child project, and the first time I bumped into Pia was at a computer group conference where she was presenting on Linux, and I got to sit in on her session. And she's an absolute wealth of knowledge about the way Linux can be used in education. And the second time I bumped into Pia, she was at another conference where she was talking about the One Laptop Per Child, and I got to have a little play with her OLPC computer, and I thought it was a fascinating little machine. So I said to her at the time, I said, we really should get together and have a chat at some point on the podcast, and she was keen to do that, but with a very hectic schedule, it's been kind of difficult to connect up, but we've finally managed to do it. So I hope you enjoy this podcast where we get to talk about Linux, about open source, about how free software is working in education, because Pia has some really good things to say about it. If you're not the geeky technical kind, you might want to just sort of I don't know, you'll probably find the first 10 minutes or so perhaps a little on the technical side, but I'd encourage you to stick with it or at least skip through it, because some of the later stuff is really, really good, and there's some great education-related stuff in here. So thanks for joining us. Here's Pia. And I'm talking now to Pia Waugh from Waugh Partners. And Pia's going to talk to us about the use of free software in education. So, g'day, Pia.
Hi, Chris. How are you going?
I'm really good, and it's great to talk to you. We've been trying to hook up and do this for a while, so it's good that we finally managed to. I think last time I spoke to you, you were on a big road trip around Australia. That was a while back.
I was. I was in the process of launching a new research initiative looking at the open source industry and community in Australia, and that report is now launched, and it's freely available on Census, census.waughpartners.com.au.
Cool.
And we had a really, really interesting results from that. So the roadshow went to every capital city in Australia, just talking to the industry and the community to try and make sure that they participated and that we got excellent results, which we did. So it was a fantastic trip.
Oh, good. Well, we'll come back to that. I guess before we start, I'll just get you to introduce yourself and just say, sort of who you are and what you do and where you fit in and what your passions are. Okay.
Well, my name is Pia Waugh. I've been deeply involved, I guess, in technology for many years. I come from my mother was a techie, and so I've been using computers since I was very young. And when I left school, after flirting with Chinese medicine for a couple of years, I ended up going into IT as a base level techie, and worked my way right up to doing strategy and solutions architecture and all kinds of really fun, interesting work in IT. I started using, I guess, free and open source software about 9 years ago. I first installed Debian, the Debian operating system, and had a bit of a play. And after a few years of really loving using the technology, which is a lot of fun, and there's so much you can learn. I learned more in probably the first 6 months of using Linux than I had in the preceding 10 years of DOS, Windows, and all the rest.
Yeah, I can believe that.
It was so much fun. And so after using it for a couple of years, I started to get a better understanding of the broader community aspects and the broader socioeconomic impact, and that was the point, I guess, when I started getting deeply involved in the community. So I became president of Linux Australia, the Australian peak community organisation for developers and technologists and anyone, I guess, interested in getting involved in the community. And since then, I've also been involved as president of a group called Software Freedom International, which run a yearly outreach event to the general public. We had over 100 countries participate last year and reach probably 75,000 people, so that was pretty fun. I also have gotten to the point now where I'm working almost full-time on open source research, strategy, deployments and such in my business with my husband that we set up specifically to really look at pushing forward the open source industry in Australia. I'm also deeply involved in getting open source out into education. So I chat to a lot of teachers and IT managers in schools. I speak to a lot of girls and boys in schools to get them excited about IT as a career and open source as a way into those careers. And I'm also obviously involved in the One Laptop Per Child project, which is bringing the one laptop per child, which is those beautiful green little laptops that are being rolled out all around the world to Australia and the Pacific. So
yeah.
A lot of stuff.
Well, you and I first met. We were presenting something at a Computer Studies Teachers Association gig, and you were talking about open source software there, and I was just totally struck by how passionate you are about it. And you know, it's true what you say. It's not just about software. It's actually about culture, isn't it? The whole open source thing is not about getting software that you don't have to pay for. It's about a mindset of belief in something much bigger than that.
Well, it is, and that's part of the reason I got involved in, I guess, Software Freedom Day. We're at a point now where technology is all pervasive, and it's only becoming more and more pervasive in everything that we do. Work, play, voting, communications, you know, every part of the human experience now has a technological underpinning, which is just becoming more and more so. Now, as we go down the path, those technologies shouldn't really be, you know, just defined and limited by individual single points of failure or control, which may be a company, it may be an individual, it could be anything. They really need to become participatory and, I guess, democratic in a way. And when you start looking at the right to participate in technology as being similar to the right to participate in your government, that's when you start to get a real understanding about the important part that technology plays in our lives. Open source, the beautiful outcome of open source is this, you know, free software that people can tinker with that's highly scalable and adaptable and all the rest of it. But one of the other main things that creates that outcome is this wonderful community. You have people from every culture, you know, obviously both genders, from different religions, different socio-geographic, economic backgrounds, all standing side by side to create great stuff. And it's just such a wonderful experiment in what humans can do when they're focused on something above and beyond the things that may possibly divide them.
Yeah. I've just been rereading The Wisdom of Crowds, and it really taps into that whole, you know, the wisdom of the group kind of thinking.
And I think open source really taps into that. Yeah. I like to apply, I guess, the concepts of open source and the open source, what we can learn from the free and open source community methodologies to completely new and different things. So, you know, apply it to the classroom, apply it to a business, apply it to how you work in government. And you'll start to see additional transparency and collaboration and openness that is ultimately beneficial for not only the organisation and the people, but our entire society.
I like that. We need to come back and talk about that. But we should just back up a second there and just, because there'll be people listening to this who are going, okay, what's this free software thing all about? So let's just back up and let's just put some definitions around that. So first of all, the concept of free software. Now, there's two things at play here. One is free as in beer, isn't it? And you don't pay for it. But the other bigger thing here is free as in speech, right?
Mm-hmm. So basically what you've got is, I'll give people a couple of definitions. You've got a few things that you might hear. You might hear open source, you might hear free software, you might hear free and open source software, you might hear free libre open source software, FLOSS. There's a lot of definitions out there. For the average person sitting at home, I think the best way to understand this is that all of these terms basically capture a mechanism for creating software, and this could be applied to anything, but creating software in a transparent fashion. So you end up not only having the source code of that being freely available, and the source code is the human readable, if you like, recipe of the software that you might use. Mm-hmm. And the usefulness of having that available is that a person might try, use a piece of software and find that it doesn't do something quite right, and they can go back and read the human readable and tweak it a bit and make it, different and new and interesting, or add new features. And that is the way that people collaborate, through having access to that open source. But there's other aspects to it as well. There's a governance issue, making sure that people can participate freely, that they can become elected, that there's an open governance area, open standards. You want to make sure that your software and the data it produces is available in a standard which is free and open, such that you can read it 50 years down, or 100 years, or 300 years down the track. I always talk about, why should my children not be able to read their love letters just because they wrote it in a digital format? And open standards end up becoming the path to real sustainability. Open market, you don't want to have a piece of software that is free to download, like shareware, but not free to be able to use in a commercial context.
Yep.
And one of the big differences between, I guess, shareware and free and open source software is that shareware, typically you can download, but you can only download with a limited license, and you still can't get access to the source code. There's not an open development community around it. It's really just something that you're downloading and using with a limited license, whereas free and open source software is a whole community around that. You have access to the source code, and you tend to never be limited in terms of how you can use it. You can use it in business or individually or in a school. And the great thing for a school about all of this is, and I've seen this in schools and universities all around the world, if you incorporate some free and open source software into your school and into your learning and that your students are using, you can give that to the students. They can share it with their friends and their families and their communities, again, completely freely, because you can redistribute it for free. And so you're not just empowering that student, you're empowering their entire community, and you're doing it without giving them a future financial or moral obligation.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, just to put a bit of historical context around that, if I understand correctly, when Linus Torvalds first wrote Linux, he just did it because Unix was too expensive and he needed something he could use, so he essentially wrote the kernel of his own operating system, put it out on the internet and said, if anyone can improve this, go for it. And it just iterated into what's evolved into what's now probably the most powerful operating system on the planet.
It's fascinating, actually, because he... there's a few, I guess, shining lights of this space, and Linus started a movement, I guess, of a operating system. You also have a guy called Richard Stallman who sort of started the core thing that I guess he brought to this entire movement, and I guess you could call it a movement, was
the licensing concept.
The creation of this fantastic license called the GPL, which basically said you can redistribute for free. You have the freedom to to read the code. You have the freedom to change the code, and ultimately, by being able to add this license to the software, it created a way for it to stay open, not for you to just be able to create it, but then someone else to be able to take it and make it into something closed, but for it to actually stay pervasive and open. So. And there's a bunch of other sort of leading lights in the space now, but
and that sort of thinking's actually become really pervasive. If you look now at things like even the Creative Commons, licensing of content now, that's the same kind of thinking, isn't it? You can use it, you can freely change it and do whatever you want with it, but you've got to allow other people to do the same thing.
The interesting thing about Creative Commons is that, Creative Commons. There are certainly Creative Commons licenses that give you that, and it's fantastic to see this open knowledge movement, because if we don't have open knowledge, we're going to be in a bit of trouble further down the track. But it is important to understand, though, with Creative Commons you have the choice. You can choose to give or revoke particular rights. So you can say, okay, I want to have something that's only free to distribute, but you can't change it and you have to give attribution. Or I want to have something that's only free for use in education, or I want to have something that's only... that you can take and redistribute and remix and do whatever you like. You have the ability to give the specific rights that you want. It's not just a one license. So,
But, it's interesting to see this kind of thinking starting to become pervasive in all sorts of areas now.
I guess that ultimately, a lot of people and a lot of your listeners will probably be able to connect with the idea of the commons. So back in oldie England, you had a paddock, and the community would work in the paddock. Everyone putting in their own bit of effort. Everyone would sow the seeds, tend the field, and ultimately get a harvest. And everyone would get the benefit of that harvest, so they would get a share of that harvest. So this collaborative work to creating a positive outcome for everyone. Although the useful thing about software is that once you create it, you can copy it, and everyone gets the full benefit rather than a partial benefit. This collaborative development model not only is it much more, I guess, intuitive in a way, in terms of how people work better. Because rather than you taking on 100% of the work of creating and maintaining and developing software, you're able to do it in collaboration with brilliant minds from all around the world.
Yeah, standing on the shoulders of giants before you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, okay, what's out there then? So, in terms of education, so I'm a teacher. I'm doing stuff with kids in the classroom. Give me the compelling reason why I want to be looking at open source software rather than, wandering down and using my proprietary Microsoft stuff.
Cool. I think that there are three ways that I think there are three areas that open source software can bring additional value or a equivalent value into schools and into the education sector generally. The first area is in infrastructure. You don't need to necessarily go in and rip out and replace anything in a school to be able to take advantage of great open source technologies. You've got content management systems, you've got voice over IP systems, messaging systems, social networking software. You've got pretty much anything you can imagine, teleconferencing. You've got all this great infrastructure that you can put in, add value to what you already have, not interrupt your existing services, and be able to bring more services and value and fun stuff for your students and for your education community. So the infrastructure area is one space where open source is just absolutely brilliant. You can do anti-spam solutions, you can do antivirus solutions, all these kinds of things at a very low cost, but in a very scalable way. So if you need to have 100 or 10,000 students, you can scale up very quickly. And we're seeing things like e-learning. A lot of your listeners would have heard of Moodle. There's a very strong Moodle community right around Australia and the world.
Yep.
And we're seeing a whole bunch of different infrastructure. So the first one's infrastructure. The second one is in terms of teaching itself. So one of the things that has been concerning to me as a person working in IT has been the changing of what's being taught in terms of technology in the schools from having an IT class to just incorporating office productivity to all of the classes. The problem is that the kids, I guess, are losing out on learning about technology and learning how to be adaptive learners. If you can teach a concept rather than a product, the student is going to be more adaptable, more able to understand what's going on beneath the surface, more able to use a different application when they go out to the workforce, and ultimately is going to be more valuable to their employer and have an easier life for themselves. So if in what you're teaching in the classroom, you can use both proprietary and open source equivalents, and you're also going to find areas where there are open source applications for which you don't have proprietary. You're going to have situations where you have proprietary for which you don't have open source. But a healthy combination of both is going to help you teach those concepts without adding a huge amount of cost. And the great thing is that for the students that go home that can't afford to buy, Photoshop or Visio or any of these kinds of applications, you can give them applications like Inkscape is a fantastic
great tool.
Yep, fantastic tool for drawing and creating. There's a thing called the Open Source Catalog. The Open Source Catalog for Education, which I'll give you a link for, and I'll give you a bunch of links for where you can find open source education software.
Great.
So teaching in the classroom, and the third one is actually teaching IT. If you're trying to teach programming, an open source language like Python, which was developed specifically to teach programming, or tools like Alice 3D, which is an animation and programming tool, which is fantastic. I've been going and teaching it in lots of high schools, and the girls absolutely, I've mainly been teaching in girls' schools, and the girls absolutely love it because they both get animation as well as this basic idea about programming. But if you're trying to teach a programming language, rather than trying to build your own curriculum and your own examples, you can just go to an open source application, download it, and you've got, okay, kids, today we're going to create a CMS.
Yeah.
Here's an example, go and tweak. So you have all this fantastic documentation, existing source code, and tools that you can use in both infrastructure, general learning, and ICT learning.
Yeah, it's really interesting that I think a lot of the pushback you're going to get from people as to not using open source software is purely legacy stuff. And I'll give you an example. My mother has a computer that she doesn't use very much, but she asked me she wanted to do some typing on it, so I installed OpenOffice on it. And now she doesn't know the difference.
No.
She doesn't know she's not using what the rest of the world thinks is, the flagship product, so to speak, because she hasn't got anything to unlearn. And I think a lot of the stuff that we have trouble with adapting to some of this new software simply because we're entrenched in this sort of legacy stuff that, Microsoft has always been the way we've done things.
This is where I think Vista has given us a very sweet gift. Vista is not only a little bit more difficult, uses a lot more hardware and resources and all this kind of stuff, but for a lot of people, it is actually a big leap. You're going to a different interface, a different, certainly Office interface,
yep.
And for them actually looking at OpenOffice is far more intuitive for what they're used to.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
There are a lot of people that think that the Vista design is better or worse, or I'm not going to go into that discussion. But if you're having to jump to a new platform, then you may as well jump to a new platform, which is going to severely cut your costs and make it more easy for you to scale and be adaptable. So,
yeah, absolutely right. If you've, and especially if you don't have that baggage to unlearn.
Exactly. Yeah.
I reformatted my son's computer the other day because it was running like a dog, and he wanted me to put Microsoft Office back on it, and I said, well, I don't have a license for that, so you get OpenOffice instead. And he complained at first, and eventually he said, you know what, this is better.
No. I mean, it has different features. I mean, one of the key things that I find when talking to people about open source, if you're looking at a free and open source application that adds something new, then there's never a problem because, it's a new teleconferencing application or learning application or blog or whatever. But when you're replacing something out, the first thing that I try to do is to sort of say to people, look, first of all, it needs to be said, this is different. It will functionally do pretty much everything that you want to do.
Yeah.
In fact, it will probably do some extra things. But unless you're aware that it is something different, you're going to constantly be looking for it to be the same, at which point you're going to have a dissatisfying experience.
Yeah.
So let's look at all the ways that it is different. Let's find the things that you like and the things that you dislike, and let's experience that as a new thing, which it is.
Yeah.
And most people get very happy. There was this great story of a friend of mine who went into an old person's home, and he set up a bunch of computers for them there. Now, he said to them, he was setting up second-hand computers, so he was charging, I think, $200 or something a computer to go and set it up, give them some basic training, and of course, if they wanted Windows, it was an extra $100 or whatever it was for the license. Mm-hmm. So about half the people took the Windows and half the people took Linux. Now, the troubleshooting was fascinating because the people with Windows, the troubleshooting he was doing for them was generally fairly basic stuff. It's frozen, or it's how do I do this, or how do I, write a Word document. It was generally fairly high level. The people who chose the Linux one, he'd turn up and they would have, replaced, installed a new kernel and just, gone and installed whole new applications. And he was just fascinated. They seemed to enjoy the experience of using the computer more, which led to more experimentation. And that was just a fascinating thing to watch.
Wow, that is interesting. So you mentioned some before, that like Moodle, so I think something that most educators would have heard of. WordPress, probably another one. Open source.
WordPress, yeah. Now, WordPress is a fantastic blog.
Yeah, amazing. Audacity.
Just on WordPress for a second. There's actually a plugin, a second project that if you run a WordPress blog and you want forums, there's a beautifully integrated forums called BBPress, which is an integrated WordPress forum. So if you install WordPress, you can install the WordPress, forum, which is called BBPress, and it just integrates beautifully.
I didn't know that.
So in terms of back-end stuff, infrastructure stuff, and then we'll jump into, I guess, the desktop. But in terms of infrastructure stuff, you've got voice over IP software, so Asterisk. Asterisk is one of those things that you should probably get your Year 12 students to do as a project to set it up. It's a little bit fiddly to set up, but once it's set up, it's rock solid. If you ever buy a international phone card to make calls, most of those services run on Asterisk. It's absolutely enormous. You can look at systems like actually, on the one laptop per child server, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's really great for schools. So for doing things like setting up a library or backing up the software for the students, or there's some great GIS applications out there now. And I mean, even using a lot of the the Google applications is quite handy. Most of that runs on open source. So yeah, some great stuff from a server perspective. From a desktop perspective, you've got Audacity and a few other great music applications. For the young kids, there's an application called gCompris, which has within it about 40 or 50 math, science, computer familiarization, and puzzles kind of applications. It's perfect for primary school kids. I'm just going to go through. There's so many different applications. I use.
Well, when you install Ubuntu, the amount of stuff that comes with that, the little apps and stuff that run as part of the pre-installed package, it's mind-blowing.
Oh, it is. It's great. And the thing is that there's probably at least 5,000 applications additional when you enable the online repository that you can just go and install stuff. So, for the systems administrators out there and the IT managers, there is a tool called Sabayon, Sabayon. The reason I bring this one up is because it's actually a profile editor. For anyone out there who's had to do profile management and group policy stuff on Windows, they will absolutely love this tool. It basically boots up a profile. You edit the profile, give it the background you want, lock it down with all the security settings you want. Just change it however you want. Then you click save, and then you can deploy that profile. And because it's showing you what's happening, it's just absolutely beautiful to work with. There's some other really great management tools and stuff. But yeah, so some really good stuff there.
So it's pretty hard to take people seriously when you hear schools say that we just don't have the money to do X, Y, Z, because a lot of this stuff will run on less cutting edge hardware.
Yeah. And
there's no real cost involved in the software, and obviously there's some setup involved. What's your experience with? Someone once said to me, you'll pay less for the software, of course, because it's free, but there's longer term implications in keeping it running. And that's always the argument Microsoft use, that total cost of ownership is going to be less because the people who maintain this stuff are easier to come by. What's your feeling on that one?
I've dealt with a lot of large corporates, government agencies, and I've seen case studies and TCO studies from all around the world. And what I will do, I'll say two things. First of all, I'll say that there are many, many, many published TCO studies from people who have absolutely no reason to care whether open source or proprietary software is better, that show that the TCO under the open source solution that they've chosen has been significantly lower.
Right.
Having said that, I think it's really important, and I think that both sides, because there is certainly misinformation from both sides of the fence, particularly when you start getting all the large corporates involved. I think it's really important that people actually do a TCO study for themselves. When it comes to support cost, it is absolutely sure that you will be spending probably a little bit more for a Linux system administrator. However, your Linux system administrator, well, I'll start the other way. Your Windows system administrator, it's been showed, can usually manage anywhere from 20 to 30 servers simultaneously, whereas a Linux system administrator can usually manage up to about 200 servers simultaneously. And in the case of Google, who have many hundreds of thousands of servers of computers in their big supercluster, their systems administrators are getting probably thousands to a single per systems administrator.
Wow!
So the people that you pay, you probably be paying a bit more money because it's fairly skilled stuff, but they'll be able to manage more servers. Now, one of the other things here is that I think one of the things that schools vastly underutilize is the keenness and interest of students.
Good point, yeah.
Particularly in high schools, but I mean also in primary schools. You'll have students who, for an IT assignment, get them to create a content management system, get them to set up a voice over IP solution for the school, get them to set up a school radio using, an old computer that you've got left over from an old refresh or something. And I think that you'll find that that's where you'll get some serious innovation and some seriously cool stuff that often enough the IT managers, who are usually doubling as a physics or an English teacher, just don't have the time to implement and to innovate because they're busy trying to just maintain what they already have.
Yeah, true. It's interesting. Yeah, I've only had a few examples where I've worked with kids and using open source stuff. I had one kid who was particularly interested in Linux at one point, so we gave him a computer from the last refresh, as you say, and just said, here you go, play with this, do what you want with it. And that was interesting because we actually had one of the other parents, his father was a Unix administrator, and so he actually gave up some of his time to come in and work with this kid and get things set up, and that was a great experience.
That's fantastic. What did he end up doing?
Look, just to get the system up and running, and this is going back a couple of years, when it was a little bit harder than it is today. But just to get the system up and running and installing software and sort of tweaking the kernel here and there, it was a good experience, and he really enjoyed it.
Cool. I think that's another kind of misconception. People think Linux, and they assume that open source is Linux, which it isn't. Linux is just a nickname for an operating system that's just one open source project. But people think Linux and they think command line. And they think, oh, it must be really, really hard. And so many times I've given a presentation and I finish and I've purposely closed my presentation while still connected so people can see my desktop. People are like, oh, that's a really nice background. Oh, what's that? That's Linux. Oh my God, it's got icons. And I think that really, honestly, people just need to get out and play. Grab a copy of Ubuntu or Fedora or, one of the many versions of Linux out there. I usually say Ubuntu, Fedora, and Mandriva are great to look at because the three of them are really pretty in all kinds of different ways. My particular distro of choice is Ubuntu. There's a version of Ubuntu called EduBuntu, which has a whole bunch of stuff installed specifically for schools. So, install it on an old computer and just check it out.
Now, you when I saw you last, you actually were giving out CDs of, I think it was EduBuntu. That's the one with the brown background, right?
I think they both have a brown background.
Or was it Ubuntu, or it must have been Ubuntu? But yeah,
I think it was Ubuntu.
It's a great. I didn't realise at the time how you can just get that CD and stick it in, boot from the CD, and play with the operating system without any commitment whatsoever to your hard drive. And then if you decide you like it later on, in one click, bang, it's installed.
Yeah, the live CD idea is fantastic, and it's also a really good tool for schools. Rather than having to ask already overworked IT support people to support a second operating system or dual boot machines, just have a live CD there, boot from your live CD, and use the live CD environment to teach additional applications and to teach the IT classes. And that way then you just reboot and you're back into Windows or Mac or whatever you were running before, and you're still only having to actually actively manage one system at a time. Yep. The other thing I think about that is that when you do inevitably go to install Ubuntu does this, and some of the other distros do as well, it'll actually already detect that you have Windows installed. It'll just shrink the size of your disk, install Ubuntu on the other partition, and then make it dual boot. So when you next boot, it'll give you the option to go into Ubuntu or Windows, and you don't have to do any superfluous tweaking. It'll just figure it out.
Oh, I didn't know that. There you go. So it's worth just restating that again for anyone who heard that just then and went, huh? What? Say that again? So you stick the disk in the drive and boot from the CD drive, and it boots into Ubuntu Linux, and then gives you the option of clicking a button and having it install itself onto your drive as a dual boot system.
Absolutely. It'll detect that Windows is there, ask you if you want to keep Windows or override it, and for those wanting to keep it, they can keep it. By the way, if you do want to keep running Windows or Windows applications under Linux, and you just want to have just Linux on the system, what you can do is just install Linux, and then you can install a virtual machine of some sort. I actually usually recommend VMware. It's not open source software, but it runs beautifully, it's free, and it runs very, very nicely under Linux. And you can run an entire Windows environment under VMware, under Linux, and it will often enough run faster than Windows running natively. But the second option you have is a thing called Wine, which stands for Windows Emulator.
Yep.
You can run Windows applications.
Windows is not an emulator, I believe it stands for. Just kind of bizarre, but anyway.
But you can actually run a Windows application such as maybe MYOB, or such as various games or a particular application that only runs on Windows and that you don't want to replace. You could run it under Wine, under Linux.
It's certainly something to think about because I don't want to turn this into a Microsoft versus anything war, and it's not. But the the costs involved in licensing every year for proprietary software can be really considerable. And I'm thinking back to my last school, it was 12,000-ish a year. That's a big chunk of cash.
I guess this is one of the things that I talk about. A lot of people, particularly in the public school system, sort of say, yeah, but Windows is free and so we'll use it. Well, it's not really free. There was a fantastic study done by a lady called Professor Catherine Moyle. Now, her works you can easily find through Google, or if you go to the ASCOS website, which is the Australian Service for Knowledge of Open Source Software, which is a research project at Macquarie. We've linked to a whole bunch of them from there. But her research showed that, the amount of money was in the tens of millions that are being spent every year. And meanwhile, there are some schools that don't have air conditioning or don't have sports equipment or don't have, or don't have their toilets fixed. And you sort of think, well, you could be, particularly with this fantastic new, funding going into the secondary schools, it'd be great to be able to use that money to actually get non-commodity stuff.
Yeah.
And, use things like open source software to, at the very least, make the best use of the money. You might have, let's say, if you've got 40 computers in the school, have maybe 30 of them running open source software and 10 running Windows or Mac. And that way they're going to get that different experience, but you're also able to put the money that's been saved from those 30 licenses of Windows or 30 licenses of Photoshop or 30 licenses of whatever, and put it into something else.
Yeah. It's interesting that there's a guy called Clarence Fisher who's a teacher in far north Canada, and he teaches a primary class up there. And he's got a classroom where he has some Windows machines, a couple of Macs, and a whole bunch of the EPCs running Linux. And I read a blog post from him a while back that really struck me, where he was talking about how what he was noticing was that when kids went from operating system to operating system, they actually worked differently. That the way they approached tasks on the Windows machines was totally different to how they approached it on the Mac, and totally different to how they approached it on Linux. And it was really interesting. Can an operating system actually start to define the way we approach a problem and the way we problem solve and work our way through problems? It's an interesting point.
And I think the really cool thing there is that by giving children access to different ways of doing things, you're going to help them be more adaptable in doing things in different ways on different platforms.
Yeah, totally.
I think that's so important. I mean, you've got adults today, and I work with a lot of them, who are used to working a particular version of an Office productivity suite, and they can't move between different versions of the same vendor because it is so uncomfortable for them to see any change in their environment. We should feel very comfortable with change, particularly in technology, which moves so fast, and that'll make us work better in any working environment, whether it be a general office or an IT job or a vet or whatever. We need to be able to be adaptable and flexible in using technology.
Yeah, totally agree. I guess as we start to wind up towards the end here, the other big project you're working on is OLPC, the one laptop per child. And I bumped into you at a conference somewhere else and had a little play of your little green beast, and they seem like a lot of fun. And I know since that time, that was a while back, that was last year sometime, the OLPC project has gone for the buy one, give one deal that they were doing in the States. I don't think we ever got that here. But I do know there's a lot of people in Australia now who have managed to get their hands on an OLPC. So what's happening in that space?
So One Laptop Per Child has been having some great successes all around the world. And one of the things that we in Australia and the Pacific realise is that really none of the countries in the Pacific have the purchasing power to individually go to OLPC to work with them.
Yep.
Particularly at the point very early on where they wanted minimum orders of 200,000 or something. The other thing is that Australia was never, and will never be on the top 10 list of countries that OLPC want to work with, because at the end of it, Australia is a rich country. We have a lot of resources and a lot of children who are very well off. Having said that, the One Laptop Per Child software and hardware are absolutely perfect for any child in primary school, because it is custom designed for children. And all the activities, the entire environment is just wonderfully and And I mean, I've recently gone and I'm in the process of helping with some trials throughout the Pacific and starting some trials in Australia that can't be talked about right now. But it was wonderful to sort of put them down in front of children and just see what they do with them. And it's just incredible because it is so intuitive. So where we're at the moment is there's a bunch of trials being kicked off around the Pacific and around Australia. The idea of Australian trials is that, first of all, we're bringing there are disadvantaged pockets of children throughout Australia that we want to be able to benefit with this project. But second of all, typical kids will also get a lot of benefit. So in Australia, both sorts of trials can be funded because we are a rich nation and we have either government or private funding for any of these kinds of stuff. And by basically providing the laptops into Australia at some sort of small premium, that premium can then go towards countries where they simply don't have access to this kind of funding. So we're going to use the ability to do OLPC projects in Australia and the Pacific to create a sort of equity sharing and the ability to connect up children from different countries and different regions and different socioeconomic backgrounds, which I think will be beneficial for the countries, for the children, for the schools, and for and for the families
involved,
as well. Yeah.
Is there a way of getting an OLPC in Australia?
There is. OLPC Australia has access to some. We will hopefully be, and it may be hopefully in the sooner, in the shorter term, but it may be more to the medium term, be opening up to ask people to put in proposals for how they might like to do trials or use them in an interesting way. So there's certainly trials that will be kicking off in Australia. If people want to get hold of them for developer purposes, they can actually write to OLPC directly, and they're sending laptops out to developers. And if people want to just get a hold of a couple to have a bit of a play, we actually have we've got about 10 or 20 that we can sort of loan out for, a few weeks at a time as well. So people can basically get in contact with me, and if they just go through to olpc.org.au, they'll be able to keep up to date with what's happening. There's a mailing list there, and as soon as we'll be able to launch the lending scheme and the buying scheme, both of which will be announced relatively soon, most likely, they'll be notified if they join the mailing list.
Oh, good. The original vision was to get them for $100, but I don't think they ever got to that point, did they? They were like 180 or something last time I heard.
Yeah, they're still around 180. They reckon they can get them down to $50 by 2010.
Wow.
Which is pretty amazing. We'll probably be, certainly at this point, selling them in Australia around the 300 mark, with the idea that the excess there is going into helping support volunteers going into the Pacific.
Right. So that's kind of like along the lines of the buy one, give one.
A little bit, yeah. One of the big differences that wasn't necessarily. We want to do things slightly differently, where we sell them in probably bunches of 5, because one of the greatest bits about this project is the collaboration. You can open up 2 laptops. They will start them up. They'll automatically see each other. You'll then be able to share stuff, so you can both, one of you can open up a write activity and invite the other person to it, or just share it with the neighborhood. And then you can have, 5 or 10 or 20 people all writing into the same document at the same time simultaneously. And they could be several kilometres apart, people dispersed around several
kilometres apart. Is that how big the sugar networking range is?
What happens is that the range from 1 to 1 is, on absolute best case scenario, 2 kilometres, although you could probably rely on about 1 kilometre. But
wow.
if the next person is 1 kilometre away from you, another person 1 kilometre away from that person, another person 1 kilometre away
they'll
from
mesh
that,
together?
They'll all mesh together,
yeah.
And if any of you are connected to the internet, everyone is connected to the internet.
Yeah, that's really neat.
Just incredible. So you start thinking about some of these remote communities and the opportunity to actually connect them up without expensive infrastructure, and suddenly that other 2% of Australia that the government aren't promising anything to, we can start to work very closely with.
Yeah. Now I've heard people on Twitter make comments about some people really love using them, and other people have gone, I'm not sure that they're they're for me. But I'm guessing that comes down to the having too much to unlearn thing that we spoke about before. That because the sugar operating system looks really different to anything they're used to, that they may be approaching it with a different mindset.
Well, the other thing is it's not made for them. I mean, it's a lot of
true,
adults will
yeah.
be like, well, I can't run World of Warcraft on it. Well, no, it's not made for that.
So the original thinking was that let's design an operating system from the ground up for a kid who's never seen a computer before. That was kind of the thinking, wasn't it?
The idea is that, first of all, they're trying to use, where possible, use existing components. So they didn't want to build everything from scratch because then it's hard to build a community around that. So they've used the Fedora Linux kernel and base operating system, and then Sugar is like a Windows interface, if you can imagine. Yep. People should definitely go and have a look at some of the YouTube videos of Sugar and you can actually download Sugar and run it on a normal computer.
Oh, is that right? Oh, yeah. I have to get a link for that. I was going to say, is there an emulator or something where people can go and play around with it and just see what it's like?
Yeah, definitely. But Sugar, and the whole idea is that it's not only for a child who's probably never seen a computer before, although a child who has seen a computer adapts very quickly. But the idea is that it's also for a child who might have literacy issues. Uh-huh. So it's mainly very icon-driven rather than word-driven or menus-driven. They've used some really amazing new innovations where rather than, browsing a file system, you basically have a journal. So everything that you do on the computer, everything that you save is maintained in a journal. And then you just, browse back through your journal to find that application that you had open or that discussion that you had or to find that file that you saved. And you have, so basically any application. So there's a whole bunch of existing open source applications that have been what they call sugarized, which means that, it now runs within the construct of Sugar and there's a beautiful little icon for it. And so they've, again, been able to leverage existing projects rather than, which is part of the reason they've been able to create it so fast. I mean, every week there are new applications available. And the latest stable version, which is 703, is just really wonderful to use, really good. There's a webcam on there.
And I was going to ask you that. So the operating system and what have you on the OLPCs is still under constant revision?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, okay. It's constantly being updated. Now, the webcam, this is one of the most exciting parts of it because there's all this great educational software on there, but the webcam that comes by default, you can take videos or audio or photos and you can very quickly share that with any other OLPC or with the server network. But they're actually integrating sometime over the coming months a full teleconferencing client. So you'll televideo. So you'll actually be able to do video conferencing between OLPCs. And if you connect to the same communication server, which is very easy to set up, so you could have a communication server and take children from a school in, Sydney and connect them up with children in a school in the Solomon Islands, and suddenly everyone can be having full video conferencing between those two schools by using an external communication server. So it's just really wonderful, the ability to pull children together and have these kind of virtual classrooms that they can learn in.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome. This is why I'm so excited about it.
Yeah. Hey, well, you'll have to give us the link for that because I'm sure there are people listening to this who would love to sort of find out more, and maybe even, as you say, there's a couple there they can get their hands on and have a look at, which would be pretty neat.
The other thing is that if there are any teacher events coming up where people would like, me or anyone else from OLPC Australia to come along, give a demo, bring some laptops along and have a bit of a workshop, very, very happy to do that. I know that there are a lot of, teacher learning events. I know there are certainly IT manager events, but I'm not sure what other sort of education events are out there. But, very happy to bring them along, run little workshops and just sort of give people a bit of a taste of what they can get out of this.
That's awesome. That'd be great. Well, I'll make sure that goes in the show notes. I'll get those links off you and we'll stick them there in the blog and people can check it out.
Brilliant.
Well, that's been great. Thanks for filling us in on all of that. I think I had the good fortune of hearing, is it Mad Dog Hall?
Yeah, Mad Dog.
John Hall.
Great.
I had the privilege of hearing him speak at a conference once, and man, if there was ever someone fired up about open source and Linux, that's the guy.
It's funny actually because Mad Dog, I first heard him several years ago, and he was one of the people that really got me fired up about getting involved in a community perspective, like beyond just the using tech stuff at home. So I heard him speak in, I think it was '99, and was just blown away. It was fantastic.
Well, you and I might have been standing in the same audience. That wasn't at the convention centre at Darling Harbour, was it?
No.
Okay.
That was only a few years ago. That was at Linux World. I organised that one.
Oh, did you? There you go.
Yep.
Excellent. Ah, cool. No, it was very interesting. And, like it really struck me because what he was saying was this whole thing that at the time people's big concern about going with open source is, but who will support it? And he turned that on its head and said, well, do you really want to go with software where there's only a couple of people who are responsible for it?
Yeah.
Don't you want the whole world to be responsible for your software? And I guess that kind of makes sense.
Definitely.
But yeah, it's great to talk to you, and you've certainly mentioned a whole bunch of things that have possibilities for the use of open source in education and how we can leverage it to get some real value out of it, and all that OLPC, I can't say that, OLPC stuff is very cool.
Well, thank you very much. And by the way, if any of your listeners ever want to email me, they are completely welcome. I'm very, very easy to find and very Googleable, and I have a blog where I talk about this kind of stuff kind of regularly as well. But I can be contacted on either pia.waugh@olpc.org.au or just grebo@pipca.org, which is my personal one. And people should feel very free to just contact me about any of this stuff that they find of interest. I certainly love having loads of conversations about exactly this kind of stuff.
Perfect. No worries. Well, I guess I'll see you at the next CSTA thing. I think you're presenting there as well.
Yes, I am.
That's right, and so am I, so we'll have to catch up.
Definitely.
But,
thank you very much.
It's good to talk to you. Thanks, Pia.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, Pia. It's always good to talk to Pia. I think she's a lot of fun to talk to and extremely knowledgeable with lots of really good insights to things. So I enjoyed the chance to have a chat with her, and I hope you did too. If you've got things you'd like to talk about on the program, we're always looking for people to chat to on the virtual staff room. So if you're doing things that are interesting with your class, we're using technology, whether you do, I don't know, using VoiceThread or blogs or wikis or Web2 tools, or maybe you're doing some cool stuff with interactive whiteboards, or just maybe you just got some other activity that I haven't even thought of that uses technology in some interesting way in your classroom, we'd love to hear about it. So drop me a line, chris@virtualstaffroom.net. Send me an email, let me know. You can also Twitter me on Betchaboy, BETCHABOY is my Twitter name, so you can add me to Twitter if you like and try and get me that way. Or my Skype name is also Betchaboy, so if you want to add me and drop in sometime and have a chat, love to do that. The format for the show, as you can see, we basically just have a chat about whatever it is that you're doing with technology in your classroom. I hit the record button, we have a conversation, and we publish it as a podcast. It's pretty straightforward. Not a lot of polished production going on here, but it's a good thing to hear what people are doing in their classes, because I think sometimes it's really easy in education to operate in a vacuum and to not know what other people are doing. So this is a great way to share some of those ideas and some of those things that are working for you. Share them with the world. So anyway, as usual, we'll get this podcast up, and you'll find all the links to the things we spoke about in the show notes over at www.virtualstaffroom.net. So pop over there and have a look. And you can browse through and go through previous episodes and everything else on the site over there. My name's Chris Betcher. You've been listening to the Virtual Staff Room. Okay, well, I guess I better start recording now, just in case you say something brilliant.
I'll try not to.